it's a positive film. It has heroes and villains, and that it essentially is a fun movie to watch. It's been a long time since people have been able to go to the movies and see a sort of straightforward, wholesome, fun adventure.
Well, it's a fantasy. It's not science fiction so much as it is space fantasy. And it's about people. It's finally about people and not finally about science.
The story, when you actually put it into words, is only so much nonsense to hang a great visual experience onto. It's the stuff that fairy tales are made of.
Sort of boiling down religion into a very basic concept. The fact that there is some deity or some power or some force that sort of controls our destiny works for good and also works for evil.
Marvelous, healthy innocence. Great pace, wonderful to look at, full of guts, nothing unpleasant. I mean, people go bang bang and people fall over and are dead, but, no horrors. A sort of wonderful freshness about it, kind of like a wonderful fresh air.
It's got whatever you want it to be. It's pure entertainment. It's like a roller coaster ride, and it can be interpreted as long as you enjoy it, which is the intention of it.
Hello there and welcome back to Generation Skywalker. This is Dan and you're listening to episode 28 of Those Old Fossils, back for more vintage collecting chat. And after covering Bosk, IG-88, Dengar, Forlom and Zuckus in the previous 4 episodes, in this 5th part of the Bounty Hunter Capture Pod, we finally reached the main event, Boba Fett. And joining me in the hunt this episode is Jez Allinson. How you doing, Jez?
Morning, mate. I'm doing very well, thank you. Yourself?
Morning. It's morning for a change. We normally get afternoon and get evening, but this is a Saturday morning.
Yeah. So,
Jez, we've decided to extend the Fett episodes from 2 to 3 since the last recording. You've had something up your sleeve for a little while now that you've pulled out the bag at the last minute, and we're going to turn it into a 3rd episode.
Yeah,
make this a trilogy now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's gone from 1 episode to 2 episodes, 3 for our primary bounty hunter here, because it was pretty much exactly to the day. This time last year, I was looking at producing a standalone Fett episode before you had sort of taken over and done your bounty hunters that you've done very recently. So I was going to be doing a Fett standalone last year, and then all sorts of stuff came up and came in the way of that. However, I had been speaking with Ron Salvatore and Chris Georgoulias about the show, and they both suggested that I speak with Brian Rachfal, who was one of the top men when it comes to Rocket Firing Fetts. Now, I reached out to Brian, and he was really willing to give up his time to me, a complete stranger, to talk to me all about his experiences, examples, and anecdotes about collecting and selling Rocket Firing Fetts. Now, in this interview, Brian is absolutely stellar, is brilliant. He gives all sorts of information, which I'm really excited to share with you and the listeners. And you'll find in the discussion that I often refer to a photo which Brian had given me, which was a lineup, like a chronological lineup of Rocket Firing Fetts from left through to right, which Brian shared with me, which actually details 13 different examples. Now, we'll share this image on our socials, Facebook and Instagram. As it is really great, and I'm sure that one day we'll turn this pod into an enhanced show on YouTube. But until then, we're just going to be producing this one as an audio-only show. So your plan was to have 2 shows dedicated to Fett, and then when I shared this interview with you, you immediately suggested, no, we need to have this as a standalone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the story behind the development of the Fett action figure is just such a significant part of the vintage Kenner line, and rather than rushing through it in the main show and giving it short shrift, I thought it'd be only right that we take a closer look and give it its own episode. So yeah, we can talk a bit more around the interview as well and put some more context to it. But I think we're going to find it's a lot more nuanced than a lot of collectors who haven't really researched the subject before. Beyond the footnotes, we'll probably give it credit for, and it's really, you know, quite an intricate little story. It's sometimes a bit of a challenge to tell what's it say, audibly. Yeah, so I think that image will give people the context they need.
You may take Captain Solo to Jabba the Hutt after I have Skywalker.
He's no good to me dead.
He will not be permanently damaged.
What we didn't actually cover was the concept, the idea behind it, the engineering of it, and then, you know, the concept to creation to then actually demise of the Rocket Firing Fett. That story which we've heard so many people say, you know, people say, oh yeah, I knew someone in school who had one of those, and all those little tales. So contacted Chris Georgoulias, and the other day, Chris and I sat down, and Chris filled me in on everything there is to know about the concept of creation to cancellation of the Rocket Firing Fett. So we have 2 brilliant interviews for you. So this entire show is quite purely about the legend of the Rocket Firing Fett.
What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me.
The Empire will compensate you if he dies. Put him in.
Yeah, strap in. There's loads to take on, and we are privileged. I don't think ever before have 2 experts been gathered like this. Yes, they've been on Star Wars sort of celebration panels and stuff, but this is a really great chunk of Rocket Firing Fett goodness.
So shall we go over to the Chris Georgoulias interview then and see what he's got to say?
Amazing.
Hello there. Come here, my little friend.
I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Georgoulias, who, if you were to check out some of the YouTube videos, so I've just checked out the ICC Con from 2021 and the Celebration Anaheim panel. And the one sort of common denominator here is Chris is on both of these panels. And in fact, it was Gus Lopez introduced him as, we have a panel here of the experts in the world. Chris Georgoulias, welcome once again to Generation Skywalker. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Jez. Happy to be here. Happy to contribute always.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is awesome. For the people who have maybe come to this podcast for the first time, or Star Wars collecting podcasts, and aren't necessarily familiar with you and seen your collecting tracks, Gus Lopez called you one of the experts in the world. Please, can you ratify that claim?
I did not put Gus up to that. He said that on his own free will. I guess it comes from now I've known Gus since the early 90s, so solid 30 years, and helped him with his website for a long time, done a lot of work on that, a lot of research into Kenner prototypes, dozens of trips to Cincinnati, Ohio over 20-year period to meet with Kenner employees, ex-employees. People were chasing down, unearthing things like rocket firing Boba Fetts, and just doing a lot of legwork to try to understand, what was going on with Kenner at the time, how they were developing toys, what the process was, what worked and what didn't work, and just learning the people who created these. And now to see some of these people in the fold, you see like Jim Swearingen, and you see like Kim Simmons, the photography side, and Tim Effler's been around, and other people. You see other people from other toy companies, so they're more in the fold now. Whereas before, like in the 90s, those are top secret. We kept these things quiet. You don't want to give any sources away, and a lot of people had things, and we were seeing things that had never been seen before, never been on the collector's market, things that people were interested in selling. When I first started collecting as an adult, I collected as a kid and then sort of dropped off when I became a teenager, and then picked it back up when I was around 20 years old, like 1992, 1993, getting on there. That's about when I met Gus. I think the first time I saw him post was 93 or so, maybe 94. I forget, no, maybe it's 93. Anyway, there were forums where you could discuss different things. And early on, I was like, I'm trying to complete Star Wars collection. I'm looking for a rocket firing Boba Fett. And even then, nobody really knew. There were no photos of these things. The very first photo I saw was in a Space Adventure Collectibles book from Tomart Publications, which was like 91-ish, I believe it came out. I forget exactly, but it had a really small picture and showed the back of the rocket, the mechanism. Oh, and I take that back. Steve Sansweet book from Concept to Scream Collectible, I think it had a photo of that. I feel like that was after that Space Adventure Collectibles book. Anyway, the point is, way back then, nobody knew anything. And things were, there was a couple of magazines at the time, Action Figure Digest and Action Figure News. And Action Figure Digest was based in Dayton, Ohio, which is right outside of, not far from Cincinnati, Ohio. And they were working with some local dealers there who had run across some Kenner people. And over the years, they have a couple stories on Rocket Firing Boba Fett's. You'd see some in Toy Shop Magazine, which was a print publication, which would predated eBay. Basically, like classified ads and ads that dealers would submit, and ads that people like me, you could write to that company and send them photos, and they would create. So every month it came out. My first issue I got was in 1992. I think it started in 88, but that was like the place. If you were to search Chris G scrapbook or Toy Shop scrapbook on Google, you'll see the clippings I did when I had a lot of free time in my mid 20s to sit around with this oversized publication every week and take my razor, my X-Acto knife, and cut out all these ads, because there were things that were showing up I've never seen anywhere. So I was cutting any rare items. So I had been researching this figure for a long time and run across many people who were at Kenner at the time, people who ended up with them at their desk. We met a test engineer. He was the only guy I remember really worked on it. But we did later meet the sculptor who sculpted the actual wax, the figure itself, which that predated the Rocket Firing Boba Fett, because they took the wax sculpture and then they put the slot mechanism, the slot cutout, and the mechanism. That would have all been done by engineering when they went to tool the figure up to make the steel molds. So anyway, that was a long one. I'm famous for my long-winded answers. That was my long-winded answer to like, why does Gus say this? When you spend that much time obsessing over collecting Star Wars and focusing on really niche areas like that. So there's a ton of stuff I don't know about Star Wars. People think, oh, you must know everything. You haven't seen. No, I don't. I know some very specific areas, but I've been around enough. I know who to ask when I need help in certain other areas. And it's like, I don't know the answer to your question, but I know who I can reach out to. So I've touched on Rocket Firing Boba Fett's before in the past, but I guess that ICC convention, that was the first one that really dove deep. Mike Havens, the promoter, he had asked, some of us to do a panel. He's really big into Boba Fett's, and Brian Rockfall. He pretty much like only thinks about Rocket Firing Boba Fett. Now I like the figure, but he is like obsessively obsessed with it, and really. So he and I were partial. We collaborated on that, and there was another guy, Daryl Johnson, and the three of us did that presentation. And then when it came time to go to Anaheim, Brian and I did the presentation, and I asked Jim Swearingen to help with that, because he was the earliest person at Kenner to actually see the Boba Fett costume. And he made the famous Kit Bash Boba Fett figure that most people have seen, or if they didn't know what it was called, the one that's on the back of the packages on the 20 back Star Wars, that you have the drawing of little painting of the Boba Fett, where didn't really look like the action figure that came out at all. But he made that very first figure after he went with his boss to visit the Skywalker Ranch, meet with Lucas, see the costume. He came back and he took 4 Star Wars figures and a Mattel Shogun Warrior mechanism and put it all together and created that first action figure rendition of the Boba Fett. So anyway, that's why I know all this stuff and all this, and I've
Brilliant.
jumped around and I probably hit on things you're going to ask me
No,
about
that's
anyway.
absolutely brilliant. I love
It's
it.
all related.
I mean, it's really important that we talk about the Rocket Firing Fett because let's face it, you know, growing up through school and college, everyone knew someone who had had one of these in the post delivered, right? I think we're all three handshakes away from someone who definitely owned one as a kid. So
That's right.
we can put this to bed right now, can't we? That this just didn't happen. So
It didn't happen. No.
it didn't happen. So
No.
in a nutshell, if we can just go back, you've already spoken about, you know, this process. We're talking sort of early 78 when you had the Ralph McQuarrie initial concepts come out, and was it Joe Johnson and starting to work on this? And then they
Hmm.
had the what was it, the screen test in around about June 78. So from June 78, we've got like 7 months in Cincinnati where just craziness, just lots of work going on, just what they're trying to capitalize on the absolute express train of excitement. So in a nutshell, can you just explain from the say the screen testing you said about the swear engines kit bashed through to December 78, please?
Oh, okay. So let's see. So you mentioned the screen test. That would be when Lucasfilm, they first took Ben Burt is narrating this, and a guy named Dwayne Dunham, I believe, is wearing the costume. And it's a fully white Boba Fett costume. And that is because the original sketches were all done in white. And the idea originally was that Boba Fett, that look was going to be a super stormtrooper, super trooper.
Yeah.
And that's why it's all white. And then the story goes that they decided, well, that would be too expensive to make a bunch of these costumes and have these super elite stormtroopers. So they changed it to use that design. They created the bounty hunter and painted the costume as we know and created Boba Fett the character. So that was in late June 78. And by July 78, that's when Jim Swearingen had gone. That costume had been completely gone from white to painted with the poncho.
Mm.
The poncho was based on the Clint Eastwood,
Yeah, all the westerns and
the
stuff.
Western,
Yeah.
right? That's where that came from. And early on, they had the spur sound as Boba Fett walked, like they really influenced by the Westerns, from the early 70s, late 60s films. And I was a big stickler on dates with these. So June was the screen test for the outfit. July, Jim went to California. He said right when he got back, he made his Kit Bash Boba Fett. So that's all still in like late July. He has that rendition. Then in November 78, a guy with the Boba Fett costume came to visit Kenner. And it's believed that's when they took the photograph that became the card back image. That's in November 78. He was there because they were really getting excited. They were ramping up because the Star Wars Holiday Special was going to premiere November 17th. There is a Kenner, like a marketing brochure that Kenner is talking about. Hey, and then this marketing brochure would go out to toy buyers and retailers, because they're always keeping them updated on how much money they're spending on advertising and what they're doing to promote this brand so that the toy buyers and the retailers will know that the Kenner's really backing this. They're
Mm.
pushing it to sell these toys. Anyway, in that brochure, they mention that they're excited about this special that's going to come out. 45 million people are expected to see it. It's supposed to be a major thing. Everybody was looking forward to this, like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Star Wars on TV. This is going to be a big deal. Kenner was excited that they'd produced a brand new commercial for this. They were the main sponsor for the Star Wars Holiday Special because they saw it as a really big, like you got all these eyes on it, and they're like there with a 1 minute commercial to promote the toys, which is really what they wanted to sell. So that was, November 17th, 78. Well, stepping it back some, at the same time, with
because
Mattel. Do you want to start talk? It's concurrent, right?
We've got a lot of stuff going on because so they've said, right, we're doing this figure. Right, the figure's now changed from white to colourful. It's got the cape. It's looking badass. You know, we're looking at various different things. But from an engineering point of view, we know people would have heard of, you know, the L slots and the J slots and everything like that. So the L slots are the first shots. They came before the J slots, which were the engineering pilots. So is that right? As they were refining this process, they were trying to get their little trigger mechanism right.
That's right. So I don't know exactly when. So they would have to draw the figure
Yeah.
at some point. It didn't look like the kit bashed figure. Now, Jim Swearingen would not have. He did preliminary work, so early concepting. Then,
Yeah.
when they say, okay, yeah, we're going to make a Boba Fett figure, it would turn over to a different team, and that team would run with it to make the production design. And then Jim would be off doing other concepting work.
Mm-hmm.
He's like the basic idea guy, and then another team would take it to actually make an actual sellable toy. So let's say in August, maybe they started doing the drawing. You would have gotten the sculptor involved. The sculpting was done. The sculpting looks exactly like the figure that everybody knows now. And then it would have gone to engineering. There was a proto-molded figure that turned up on one of the trips actually that I was a part of. That figure was proto-molded, means made with prototype tooling at Kenner, versus like a first shot or something, which is actually from the production tooling, often made at a vendor who's going to actually make the product. So these proto molds were like quick aluminum molds that they could cut. Aluminum's pretty easy to machine into, but it's a soft material, but they don't make that many shots in it. So they could use it to make prototype molded figures. So a proto molded figure turned up. They shot it. I think it was all in white plastic and it's hand painted. The mechanism was more crude, but it was all legit. It was Kenner made it. A lot of hand working goes into something like that. So you're better than a kit bash, but not quite, up to snuff compared to like a production toy. So that fell in there somewhere between August, maybe September. So I don't know how long it took for them to make the production tool, but then after that you would make a production steel mold, and you hear that L slot. L slot is something that collectors like we call. I mean, I had to be one of the first people I remember seeing L slot. The cutout in the backpack is like a backwards L, a reversed L shape, and that's the very first one that turned up. That's what we thought the rocket firing Boba Fetts were in the up to I think 96 ish. Action Figure Digest magazine, which is one I'd mentioned before, they had an interview with a testing engineer there was a toy seller called the Earth in Cincinnati, working pretty prolifically in the early to late 90s, especially even into the 2000s. But that was a big time for them in the 90s. They were turning up a lot. They were placing ads in the local paper. They originally operated out of their apartment in Cincinnati. Then they got a storefront in 97, and the storefront had a giant awning and it says "We buy toys" on there, and it was on a fairly major road. And they had on the side that would say, Kenner employees. So so many people worked for Kenner or had relatives. So it was easy. The word passed around. Anyway, they turned up a guy who had J slot figures. And that was the first time the J slots had been shown. Now, the J you went from the L they changed the L shape to a J shape because the J required to pull the mechanism down before you let it go, versus the L shape where you could just tap it sideways and it would launch the missile. So the J was an attempt to maybe keep it from accidentally firing.
Yeah, it's like a little safety catch.
Like a little safety catch. The thing is, when you really look at the figure, the missiles never clipped into it. So you turn the figure upside down, the missile just fell out. It's a terrible design. The spring was really weak. When you click it, the missile just tumbled because it was so short. it sounds like all great, but
Yeah.
you know, at the time, like Mattel's toys had better missiles, and Mego had better missile firing toys. Those missiles clipped in. I know the Mego toys, the missiles are a little bit longer, so the longer the missile, like the it's going to stay straight. It's like a you know,
Hmm.
like a firework, like a
Rifle.
bottle rocket with a stick, right? Like a rifle. It's going to stay straighter. Anyway, the Kenner mechanism was a joke from the beginning. It sounds greater. It sounds better than it actually was. Anyway, so you had proto-molded happen. They would have to create the steel molds, create the L slots, do their testing there, change the design to the J slot design, do more testing there. So this is all happening sort of in the fall of 1978. And they needed to have something put together because Toy Fair was in February of 79. So they had to have the products ready to show in early February. But before that, you had to have your catalogs printed. So the Toy Fair catalog would have been printed, you know, at least by July 79. So there's a lot going on in the fall period. Unfortunately, like I said, I haven't found enough documentation to show exactly what things were happening when, but that's in those 3 months or so. Most of this testing and development was happening. They were making many different, like there was L slots in different colors. There were L slots. Some L slots were hand painted to look like the production action figure. Some were more elaborate than production action figure. There were some L slots in like a darker blue, like more of a production, sort of like the gray, I guess, like the
Mm.
production figure. The early L slots were more like a bluish color, which was not like a Boba Fett color, but those were unpainted. The L's were more production intent, so they sort of had their factory paint worked out by that point. They had their plastic color worked out by that point in time. So like I said, so that's in like fall 78. Well, at the same time, Mattel has Battlestar Galactica comes out in August 1978, premiering their fall premiere of that TV show based on the success of Star Wars and actually special effects by John Dykstra, who did the effects for Star Wars, and you know, his company went on to work on that, and there was a big lawsuit between Lucas and them, you know, for copyright infringement. Like, you're copying Star Wars or with this TV show, but because Star Wars was big with the toys, you know, they had already been selling toys early 78. Mattel jumped right on it and they had toys ready to go for Battlestar Galactica. And in the fall of 78, they're starting to advertise toys because that's the heavy buying season for Christmas. So, you know, you're looking at August, September, October, November, you know, most of that's like the heavy season. So fall 78, that's when Battlestar Galactica releases their toys, and they had four vehicles in this lineup for Battlestar Galactica, and each one fired the same small missile, like a little 1 inch long, 25 millimeter long missile. It clipped in. It was a pretty forceful spring. It was a much better mechanism than the Kenner one, but by early December, they started getting reports that kids were shooting these into their mouths. And the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which is sort of like a government agency, you know, tasked with making sure consumer products are safe. They do, you know, safety testing on all kinds of things. You know, you go to a store, not just toys, but bicycles and sporting equipment, and you name it. You know, they're involved with that. And they started getting reports that kids were swallowing or aspirating. So some of these kids were like breathing in or something. The missile went into their lung.
Wow.
So you say why or wow?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean,
wow. Yeah, why and wow.
yeah.
But they're kids. You know, kids do silly things. You know, they're like, oh, this thing shoots off. Let me point this thing and shoot it into my mouth. So early 78, you know, they're getting these reports, and then Mattel put safety labels on their toys that says, hey, don't fire this into your mouth or into your face. So that's happening. And that's, you know, early December. And all the toy companies from the toy side here they have people, their safety people are talking to like Mattel people. So when it comes to that, you know, the toy companies are sharing information. Otherwise, they're very secretive because they don't want the other company to know what they're building. But when it comes to something like that, they do share information. They have people on, in these committees, I guess, that are all part of it, and they're all work towards a common goal of trying to keep their products safe. Anyway, so they know this is happening with Mattel, and at the time they're still developing the rocket firing Boba Fett. It's probably why they went from the L slot to the J slot
Mhm.
to try to make some difference there. Maybe it's hard to. That's speculation on my part, but it seems to fit. There was an early transparency that turned up of the Boba Fett card back, and it had a warning at the top printed across the top. It says, "Caution: Do not launch projectile towards face." So they were aware of it at the time. Still early on, the Mattel toy it had passed its safety tests already. Even on the packaging, it would say pass safety standards. But they went to that extra level of putting the warning label on it, saying don't launch it to your mouth, towards your mouth or face.
Sure.
At the same time, Kenner's putting that little warning on top of their Boba Fett card back. So they're both kind of working on the issue. But then the big turning point was, a kid in Atlanta had gotten Georgia area, Atlanta area. He had Atlanta in North America, United States, had gotten one of the Battlestar Galactica toys for Christmas, and his little brother got a hold of it, and he was 4 years old, and he shot that into his mouth, and it went into his lung, and he asphyxiated from that. And by the time they got him to the hospital, he was in bad shape. So he was on life support, I guess, for 4 days, but then he died on December 29th, 78. And that was the big turning point. Now you had not just kids swallowing missiles, but a child that actually died from that, and that was a big deal. And the Kenner people were definitely like, we're just getting rid of this mechanism completely. So they changed course. For them, it's easy enough. They were like, oh, just take the slot out of the backpack, sort of sonic weld the missile into place, and move on, and don't worry about it. It was a free action figure anyway, and nobody's gonna, people aren't gonna return it and say we don't want this figure. But as everyone knows, it came out with the card that says, sorry, we had to remove the rocket firing feature for safety reasons.
Yeah.
Hope you understand. And but it was interesting. So sometime in the 90s, some Battlestar Galactica collectors had contacted the Star Wars Collectors Archive, or somehow there was a connection made there, and somebody had the death certificate from when that child died, and it very clearly states in there, that he was asphyxiated by the missile. But the interesting thing is that the coroner, or whoever filled out the death certificate, wrote Star Wars toy put into mouth.
Yeah.
It wasn't Star Wars, but to the layman, Star
Absolutely,
Wars
yeah.
that's Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, same thing, right? So I don't know how widespread that wouldn't have been widespread at the time. I'm sure people would, Lucasfilm would be like, hey, wait a minute, this is not us. But there was just an interesting side note that's like, wow, it actually says Star Wars toy put into mouth. But anyway, so yeah, that takes you into December, how that stuff happened. And the story gets kind of more amplified there. So in January, early January, because of the result of that death, Mattel redesigns their toys, and they put these little plastic tabs on their missiles so that they would assemble the missile into the toy, so it would just click forward, just enough to make a click sound, but it wouldn't launch forward.
Right.
And they instituted a recall program, and they were trying to get parents to mail the missiles back into them. Then they were offering a Hot Wheels car for every missile that you got mailed in. Well, most kids wanted missiles for their Battlestar Galactica, so more parents were like saying, "We need missiles. We lost the missiles. We need missiles." And Mattel's like, "Nope, we're not doing missiles anymore." So poor Mattel. I mean, and poor, that poor child died. But Mattel wasn't doing anything really wrong at the time. Mego had been selling toys. Lots of toys had come out with little firing missiles. It was just, it just happened like that. But it was interesting how many. I was doing research at the time when I was doing this presentation, and I'd seen, by January they'd had 10 incidents of, swallowing or aspirated. So they were having to go, dig these missiles out of these kids' lungs, and the swallowed ones, what can you do? It passes through, and but the aspirated ones, that requires surgery to get them out. And I'd found by April, because they still had, people are still playing with these toys, Battlestar Galactica toys, and things are happening over time. By April, I found 27 reports
Wow.
of something, and those are the ones that got reported. You don't know how many people swallowed that missile, and the parents like, you idiot, or where did the missile go, or the kid didn't say anything about it and just swallowed it and went on his way, right? So anyway, yeah. So January, that's all taken off. Mattel's missile recall program. So January, I've mentioned earlier, that's probably around when they were printing the Toy Fair catalogs. Well, if you look at the Toy Fair catalog from 1979, there's an inset photo of each figure, and has a little blurb written inside the photos. But it's curious because on the Boba Fett one, it just says has a laser rifle and a backpack, which the backpack's part of the back. There's nothing special about the backpack, and there's a lot of empty space underneath it. And I'd surmise that it probably used to say a backpack that fired or with two spring launched rockets. But that would have been something easy for them to change because they weren't showing the figure from the back.
Yeah.
So you take that wording out, and then another cool thing from going to Cincinnati, there was one visit we found a guy who used to run the model shop, and he had photos from Toy Fair, and there was a photo of the setup from Toy Fair of 1979. So February 79, there was a shot of the display, and you can see a loose Boba Fett figure in there, a carded Boba Fett figure, and then one of the figure card backs turned around, and you see the back of the card back, and you see they had already applied the sticker that covered the rocket firing graphic that used to be on the package before that. It turns out later on, somebody, it was a year or two later, and through another collector turns up the actual carded rocket firing Boba Fett sample that the guy got from the Toy Fair booth somehow. We still don't know exactly. And he kept it all those years, and word of mouth, and the collector found out about it and said, hey, this thing just turns up. And I think it may have been Ron Salvatore's like, hey, wait a minute, I think there's a photograph of this because the card back's a little bit different. And sure enough, I mean, that photograph was used to authenticate that carded rocket firing Boba Fett. And that thing went on to be pretty famous. It went on many, many years later to be on the Pawn Stars TV show. It had been up for auction a couple of times. Eventually, finally landed in a permanent home after, they tried to sell it a few times. But that figure, it's a J slot Boba Fett with the missile in the backpack. But if you look at it from the side, you can see it doesn't say anything about rocket firing. It just looks like from 5 feet away, it looks like a regular Boba Fett figure, card back and everything. But it's actually the card back. The image is all different when you really look at the details. But then we knew, oh well. So they had, by Toy Fair 79, they got rid of the idea of rocket firing Boba Fetts, but they didn't actually have a non-rocket firing Boba Fett on display. It was still rocket firing, but they weren't advertising it as such. And unless you turned the thing around to see it, you wouldn't have known that. And I went sort of frame by frame I have one of the Kenner Boba Fett commercial reels, and I could see, you could just see like one or two frames where you could just see that the slide mechanism on the back. And because they would have done the commercials pretty early on, and those commercials would have been ready by the time Toy Fair was out, and sort of a little bit after to sort of show it on broadcast TV. So those are a lot of dates and times, but that's sort of how all that stuff happened. When you go from developing this to the Mattel problems to the death to the non-firing Boba Fett that everybody got used to seeing. I mean, I was one of those kids, I sent off for that. I was looking at the card back. You see that modified kit bash, version of the figure. And then when I got the figure, I was like, this doesn't look at all like that picture. And then you got the little note and like, wow, that sucks. I was looking forward to this being a rocket firing figure, but you're 8 or 9 years old and you move on, and So the rest
Chris,
is
thank you.
history, as they say.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. But what a snapshot in time, because we're talking like, from them saying, right, this is it, this is the drawing, let's go, and you've got this initial plan. You're talking like 4 months. We've got 128 days or so from let's start the tooling, let's do this, to everything's going
Exactly.
great. 3 different stories going on. So you've got the engineers, you've got the tooling, you've got the merchandising people who are then creating the car backs and advertising this, and at the same time you've got the Mattel stuff, and it's almost like some film, just as I said, like by the 7 months in Cincinnati, where it just ends with this tragic loss of life, with this young
Yeah.
person, particularly at such a cruel time just after Christmas, and
Yeah.
and that is the story of the Rocket Firing Fett, from the initial concept to its demise.
Yep.
And in that period of time, we've discussed, I mean, we're going to come on to a great interview with Brian Rachfal shortly, but about 100 of these prototypes that we're aware of, that we are trading hands or in collections. I understand, you've spoken about this in the panel, that you own a Rocket Firing Fett.
I do have one, yeah. And in my journeys, I've been around seeing these unearthed from the original sources. I was thinking about it earlier. I was like, man, I should figure out how many. I probably was there. I've seen at least a dozen come up from nothing into like, wow, from
Wow.
the Kenner source. Like, oh my gosh, this guy has a rocket firing Boba Fett, or this guy has a bunch of missiles. And they were like, oh wow, this is a painted one. This is a painted L slot. We never seen this, or they never seen this paint scheme. Or like, here's one in weird colors. So I've been very fortunate to have been involved in those things. When you see a real one, when you see enough real ones, you sort of can tell, you can, why a modified one isn't the same, why some of these pro custom figures, the Poon Fett is a great thing to have as a placeholder, but people say, oh, you'd never know. Like, yeah, if you're looking at photos, but you can tell when you feel these things and you really look at the details. Like,
Sure.
certainly, pretty much all of them now are authenticated by Tom Derby at Collectible Investment Brokerage. He's seen way more than I have. He's held way more because he's gone through. People have sent them for 20 years or longer
Yeah.
to have them authenticated. So there's a way that you can definitely tell they're legit. They still keep turning up. Not that many years ago, I saw a find where I think it was four J slots turned up. They were pretty battered condition. My kid had them. He played with them. Some were from the test department. Some had broken, like the J. There's a little like part of the backpack that looks like a little finger that makes sort of like the, I call it a tab. It's not really a tab. It's part of the molding, but that could break off. It's the thing that makes the J shape. If you take that tab off, it sort of looks like a B shape, I guess.
Right.
Anyway, point is, those were broken off on some of the testing. That was one other problem they had with the testing. I should clarify that. The test technician that originally turned up with the J slot Boba Fett's, it was Chris Fawcett and myself. We were in Cincinnati. We went to meet him. He still had one of those J slots left, and he was telling us that he did some of that testing, and he was saying that little when they put the side load on that little piece of plastic, it could break off,
Mm-hmm.
and that was just because the J slot is really a much weaker design. The little slide is very thin, and the whole thing feels too fragile for a production intent design. So it's probably just as well that they didn't do it, because that seemed like that would break anyway. The L's were much more robust. And like I said, who cares? I mean, when you fire a real one, you look at you see how the missile just like pops out and it's flipping around in the air, and there's nothing to it. And you're playing with it and it's rattling around. It's basically like a pencil in a pencil cup. Right? That's kind of what it feels like. It's rattling around. It's not straight. If you turn the figure sideways, it can fall out. And forget about upside down. So you can't really play with it. You hold it very still with one hand, and you'd use your other hand to launch the mechanism, and it would think, and it would kick like a football. You used to make those little paper footballs out of high school. That's what it would shoot off like. So it was very much a joke. But
maybe the way the story is then unfolded is because of this, Boba Fett became as cool as he became. because actually, if maybe this was released, maybe Boba Fett would have been the I'm not saying the Jar Jar Binks, but the joke of this, because the figure's the joke, and actually in Return of the Jedi he lasts like 1 minute and then he's in the Sarlacc pit, so you never know.
Maybe so.
Maybe this
That's a good.
saves Boba Fett.
Maybe it did. Maybe it made him cool, because if you're like, man, that stupid little thing, the missile flicks out.
Maybe
Maybe they did
everyone
us
would
a
be just like,
favor.
yeah, that's the General Medine of Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah. I think the mystique made it that much cooler. You grow up all those years. I mean, even to now, once in a while, you'll see some person that's just finding out collecting, and he gets on Facebook and he doesn't really know that this figure didn't exist. Or somebody goes, "Oh no, my friend definitely had one." These memories are very strong with folks, and they're not dissuaded when you say no, this didn't actually occur. The mystique still lives on. It's still there. So for Generation X boys especially, I guess it's just one of those things. It's like, oh, it's just part of childhood memories.
Yeah.
You remember that. You remember Star Wars. Remember Boba Fett. I think that's why Boba Fett continues to be a popular figure. That's nostalgia for you, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason we do all this. Chris, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to talk to me and the listeners about the Rocket Firing Fett and the journey, and as we say, 7 months in Cincinnati or whatever it was, that whole timepiece, and just lining it all up. It's been a privilege chatting with you and listening with you. We will be signposting people to the panels, which are on YouTube and stuff, and I sincerely hope to see you in 2027 in Star Wars Celebration, where I'm sure as part of your duties on the collecting track, you'll be doing a panel or two.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. And I would encourage your listeners to look for those videos, things I've been talking about. There's photographs that sort of go along with everything, and it makes it more of an impactful story. But as I'm looking at my clock here, I realize I'm turning your podcast and probably to a 5-hour podcast. So I'm sorry about that. It's hard to distill this down and make it. You could cut to the basics, but then you lose I don't know, the detail. I think makes the stories more interesting and more impactful. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thanks again for having me, and look forward to checking out the episode.
You're a legend. Thank you ever so much. Cheers, Chris. Thank you.
Cheers, Jed.
Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Okay, so we're back then. So that was a great interview, Jez, with Chris Georgoulias. It's mad getting these guys on and having access to the knowledge that they've got. But yeah, he's given a really good overview there of the evolution of the Rocket Firing Fett. Shame it. I don't know is it a shame it didn't get released. It sounds like Chris wasn't entirely sold on it.
I know, and as we said, who's to say if it had come out and if it had been just is it Dan Squib? If it had been that letdown, if it had been the what's the modern day equivalent of something which didn't really live up to the hype.
Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah, absolutely. It could have been the vintage era of nice.
But could you imagine? Like people now pay like £45 for the Cloud Car Pilot's little comlink thing. How much those red rockets would be worth? Because everyone would have lost them.
Yeah,
we're quite lucky they're fixed, really.
Yeah, so I really didn't see that coming with the Chris interview. This is someone who's obviously had loads in his hand and has seen it and has seen the different mechanisms. So, no, that was great. Chris, thank you ever so much for giving your time up to talk to me and enlighten me and our listeners. Brilliant stuff.
So we're on to our second interview, and you gave it a bit of context at the start, Jez, with obviously this being a 12-month-old interview. Is there any other points of note before we get into it?
Yeah, I would say that at the point of recording, I thought I was going to be releasing this, within a week or so. And we made reference in the interview to some upcoming auctions, which have clearly passed since then. And I think we're going to be covering those auctions and the price of sort of Rocket Firing Fetts in either episode 2 or episode 3. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. In the next episode, we're gonna cover that off. So we'll reference back to some of this at the end.
Amazing.
We can pay you 2,000 now, plus 15 when we reach Alderaan.
17.
So what we're going to be doing then is we'll go over to the Brian interview where we've got that sort of background knowledge now, but Brian is going to go into detail of the L's, the J's, talking about various different things and talking about his finds, but really right from the very beginning, how it all started with the Jim Swearingen model and then all the way through to the end. And we're going to be talking about peach and black rocket firing Fetts. Really interesting stuff. Great interview. Let's go over to it now.
Let's talk about Boba Fett, Star Wars villain with his laser rifle. Baby, let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about Boba Fett, bounty hunter. Let's talk about Boba Fett. Let's talk about Boba. Let's talk about
Boba Fett.
Let's talk about
The best bounty hunter in the galaxy.
Absolutely delighted to be joined by Brian Rachfal this evening. Now, this is someone who, whenever I hear Rocket Firing Fetts, this name comes up. In fact, earlier on, I Googled the man and I immediately started seeing images of Boba Fett, links to a Star Wars Collector's Archive, even his own website, rockfalenterprises.com. Brian, welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you with us.
Hi, Jez. It's good to be here.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much. It's one of those things. I had a flashback to Raiders of the Lost Ark earlier on because I was reading up on you and it said you are an obtainer of rare antiquities. And that took me right back to when Major Eaton was talking to Indiana Jones about, you're a professor of archaeology, expert on the occult. And how does one say it? Obtainer of rare antiquities. And that certainly seems to be the case with you.
I guess so. I've not had it put that way, but yes, I do have a tendency to go after the rarer material. Yes,
absolutely.
Indeed.
Now, I looked at a post earlier on. It was 2019. It was from the ICCC, and they said you've been collecting for 30 years. So that will take us back now to about 1989. But no doubt you were also collecting as a child.
Yeah. Well, that's when I probably started collecting again because I got into business and started professionally buying and selling Star Wars toys and vintage non-sport cards. But I've always collected. Star Wars pretty much started it, though, back probably when I was 8 or 9, because prior to that, as a kid, you get toys, you just take them out of the package, throw the packages away. But with Star Wars, when I was at the toy stores, you'd hear the parents talking about the toys and how they were going to buy a set for their kids. They're going to buy a set for themselves and put it away. I remember one guy saying how he was going to buy a whole case and just put it away for himself. So when it came to the Star Wars toys, even though I did play with my toys, I was more conscious about taking care of things. So I kept the packages, the inserts, the instructions, made sure I did an inventory that all the weapons were there at the end of the day, which was not an easy task because we had like a shag rug and Princess Leia's blaster is very small. So that's kind of what got me into collecting initially as a child. And then, you get older, you outgrow the stuff. And I pretty much sold a lot of my collection, probably around 16, 17. I wanted to get into, I collected coins as well. And I always wanted to get a gold coin. So I figured I'd sell the Star Wars stuff and buy myself a gold coin, which ironically did not happen because simultaneously they came out with stereo TV and stereo VHS. And I was recording Doctor Who at the time, and I wanted to record it in the best possible way. So my Star Wars collection got sacrificed to Doctor Who, basically. And it wasn't until around 89 when I wanted to get into business, and I teamed up with a coin dealer to start selling vintage non-sport cards and vintage sealed Star Wars figures that I actually was introduced to collecting. So wow. I had two phases.
Right. Okay. So 1989. Yeah. So only a few years after we kind of stopped seeing them mainstream in the shops. Okay. When did it start to go into the more specific elements of Rocket Firing Fett?
Well, first of all, we had to determine that they even existed. And that was a thing. I mean, because this is like, so 89, very early 90s, when you would do shows, people would come up to you and ask you if you had them. And we, of course, didn't. And I wasn't even sure at the time they even had made them. You had, of course, pictures of the two different type of Boba Fett's from the early collecting, the little collector cases that I think they were produced in 1978. And you had Jim Swearingen's Kit Bashed Fett in there. And then we now know the other one was actually the proto mold. So those were both Rocket Firing Fetts. But since you only saw them from the front, we had no idea what was going on there. So I wasn't really too sure if they had ever had a Rocket Firing Fett. And of course, you would have people coming up all the time saying that they had one as a child, or their friend had one as a child. It was you got that a lot, but there was nothing. It wasn't until Steve Sansweet published his book, I think around about that time, that we got to look at one of the first L slots. And it became clear that there was something going on out there, that Kenner had produced something.
Right. Yes. So if we think about it from a family point of view, a lot of people would have heard of Rocket Firing Fett, but now already we've got Jim Swearingen's The Kit Bashed one. So would people refer to that as the original, the very, very first one?
Yeah, that's ground zero. That's really the only one you can really truly. Everyone we throw the word prototype around very easily, but that is the prototype. That is the concept piece. And he, of course, created that by augmenting pre-existing Star Wars figure parts. And then I think he used the model shop created the rocket firing mechanism for that from a Shogun, a Mattel Shogun Raider toy. So that did actually rocket fire. And that is the original prototype. But what gets confusing about that piece is that there was just the one, but it was reworked several times at Kenner. The initial version of it was really detailed. It had a cape as well. It had a brown cape. I think Jim said that he cut the vinyl off of a binder and he used that for the cape. And that was the first version. Then that gets stripped down and is photographed without the cape. And that's the version we're all familiar with from the first collector's case insert photo. Then it's reworked 2 more times. So it's still the same figure that appears on the back of the 21 back cards advertising the rocket firing feature. It's just by then it's very heavily airbrushed, so it looks like it's a drawing.
Right.
And to this day, we just don't know what happened to that piece. It's just kind of disappeared.
Okay.
But that would be ground zero.
Yeah. So that was my next question. Whatever would have happened to that? Because Jim is very much an active contributor on the scene now, who's been welcomed, to celebrations, and I've seen him doing things. Do we think then that is potentially in a collection, but just one of these collections which is never going to see the light of day, because there are quite clearly a lot of private collectors out there?
There are a lot of private collectors, and I know some of them would be more than delighted if they had it to just keep it to themselves. But the vibe I get from talking to people is that it probably got thrown out. Right. The last time I was talking to Jim about it, he was saying that it was very delicate even back then. And I think he lost track of it because he took it to the morgue, and that's basically, it disappeared from there. Back then in the day, these Kenner guys, this was just a Monday or Tuesday to them. They weren't looking at these things like it's, a great treasure. So it might have just fallen apart and ended up in the garbage somewhere. I tend to want to be more hopeful. I'm wondering if somebody out there has it. They moved to some other country. It's in a sock drawer. But then that brings up another concern: is if it exists today. It's one thing if it disappeared and was lost 30 years ago, but wouldn't it be heartbreaking to find out if it's lost just maybe a couple months ago because someone passed away and no one knew what it was, and it looked like it was just a piece of garbage and they threw it out. That's my greatest concern with that it's not going to look like, to an inexperienced eye, it might not look like it's anything special.
Sure. Yeah. Now, you said about this is, a Monday or Tuesday to some of these kind of creators. I love the fact, by the way, that you said that the cape was created from some sort of ring binder. I think that's just wonderful. I love that artistic process where they're just like, yeah, that'll do. We've spoken about Jim Swearingen's kit bashed one. And from then on, was it the proto mold?
Yes, the proto mold. So the kit bash just gave them an idea of what they wanted. But after that, they executed a wax sculpt, and the proto mold is the very first time you actually get to see the rocket firing mechanism married to the design that was in that wax sculpt. Because the wax sculpt, of course, didn't fire. They gave the guy a little plastic buck to sculpt around, and they told him this is going to house the firing mechanism, and so that's what he did. So it's a great irony when you look at the sculpt is closer to what we actually got as a non-firing Boba Fett versus rocket firing. But the proto mold is the very first time you actually get to see the rocket firing mechanism added. And it's similar to an L slot, but it's a little different. It's more of a T slot. The slot in the back actually comes down a little bit below the latch, so you could supercharge the spring. Right. Which happens to be a very strong spring, by the way. Mm-hmm. Maybe what I should explain what a proto mold is for people who aren't familiar with that. Please. They're taken from low yield aluminum molds. I think they call them Kirksite, but a lot of people in early days, we call them aluminum, and that's just kind of the terminology that we use. It's not correct, but these molds were never intended for production. They were just intended to produce sample figures that they could use for photography and for marketing purposes, basically. They're generally all white, so the proto mold is all hand painted. If you look through the slot in the back, you can see it's all white inside. Right. And the example that happens to exist today, what makes it so special, is not only is it the only proto mold that survived, it's also the one that was actually used in photography. So when you see a point of purchase display advertising the Boba Fett figure at that time, whether or not it has or does not show the firing feature, this is the figure that was used in that specific photograph that was used to create the marketing material. And we believe it's also the one that's on the back of every 21 back card, all the way through to the very first 41 back Empire Strikes Back cards. It shows basically the figure in the same pose, is just the blasters raised on the back of the cards, where most of the images where you see in the point of purchase displays, the blasters held at the side. But Kim Simmons, who saved all of Roy Frankenfield's work, because Kim apprenticed under Frank in the early 80s and later bought out his studio. Kim saved a lot of this stuff, and it's his opinion that although the transparency for the image that shows up in the back of the figures doesn't exist, it's probably likely the same figure. So the proto mold is a pretty exciting piece. But getting back to that spring, when I initially picked the figure up, it came from I've been trying to get it for a while. It came from Tom Derby, finally. And he said, don't fire this thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to fire it. I'm not going to fire it. But I had to see if it latched because it's just morbid curiosity. And luckily nothing happened to it, but it gave me quite a start because the latch for this proto mold, it's rounded just a little bit. And so it doesn't hold too well. Right. So I latched it. It looked good. It held. And I turned it in my hand just at a slight angle. And you heard this sickening snap sound. I mean, and this thing hit my wife on the thumb at about 3 feet with enough force that came back at me about another 3 feet. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, this would put some poor kid's eye out. If she hadn't been there, I think it would hit the wall.
Why?
And talking to one of the guys familiar with this particular piece, he was saying that pretty much was the end of that spring. That they after that they overcompensated and they made sure the springs on the L slots and subsequent Rocket Fetts wasn't going to be that strong, which was an overcompensation because anybody who's got any of these Rocket Fetts, you know that they don't really fire too far. So
Yeah, I see the bravery, the curiosity of actually, doing that. I'm sure that if I had one in hand, I'd be, same sort of curiosity there.
Well, with the Protomo, that was an accident, and
Yeah.
I had a magnifying glass out there. I'm checking it. My poor wife, she's like, hey, my finger, and I'm looking at the thing with a magnifying glass, making sure nothing cracked, which fortunately it didn't. But that's a piece I'll never fire again. But up until the prices started getting really ridiculous, I've fired every Rocket Fett that's ever come through the business. J slot, L slot, I've fired them all. I wouldn't, now at the prices the way they're going today, I wouldn't. I would fire an L slot. I would not fire a J slot anymore. It'd just be a little too risky. They're just they're delicate.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm really, really content to jump all over the place actually, and as the conversation goes. So you've just spoken about prices and how things have gone. So let's just stick with that a second, because when these first started to appear in the early 90s or so, what were you talking there? People knew that they had something special, but they were relatively straightforward, weren't they?
Well, yeah, and I mean, in the mid 90s when these started coming up, and these figures, we're talking price points here on these, what they were going for at that time. Yeah, I mean, at the time, they were only going for like about maybe $1,000-$1,500. A J slot, my original J slot, which I still have in my collection, I bought it in '95. It was like the fourth one found, and I think I paid a whole $2,500 for it back then. And and back then, everyone was saying that was really expensive, and there was debates. Every time you discuss a price with one of these things, it's the same old story. Oh, how much higher can it go? It can't go much higher than this. I was one of the few people back then that I was telling people, I think these things are going to be worth 10 grand one day. And they're like, oh, no, that can't happen. Oh, then we got to 10 grand. And then, I think for a long time, we stalled at around about 14, 16,000 for these. And at the time, there really wasn't a great difference between what you're paying for an L slot or a J slot. The L slot, of course, being the unpainted first shots that were created to test the molds, and the J slots being the engineering pilots. There was maybe a couple $1,000 difference between the two, and that was about it. And that held pretty steady up until 2013. And then, of course, Disney buys Lucasfilm. And then you started seeing some immediate shifts. 18,000 for a figure suddenly becomes $25,000, $30,000 for a figure. And then I know some people were, when they got to the 35,000 price point, they started selling because they figure, oh, how much higher can they go? But already when they were selling at 35, I was hearing sales at 50, and then the auction houses got involved. And that's when you really started seeing the prices jump, because a lot of this stuff was being sold collector to collector behind closed doors. And in some ways, it kind of kept the prices down. Once they hit the open market through the auction houses, anybody who wanted one could participate. And then you saw, then of course, with I think with one of Hake's earlier auctions, then it goes to 80,000 and 100, and I think they topped out at one point around 235 on a normal L slot. And then the market cooled a bit after that. Next figure that they sold, I think, only went for 125. So, and it's like some sanity came into the market and people started backing off. And with that too, availability also stopped. People weren't offering them for sale at that point. And then there's the heritage auction. I had a client that had one of the rare L slots. It was a hand-painted L. Any of the L slots that you see out there are always hand-painted. They're not like the J slots, which were painted by mask. And we were trying to find the piece a home, and we could not find it a home at the price point he wanted. So I convinced him to give Heritage a shot, and then we saw a new jump in the price because now that went for a little over $500,000, which has stunned everybody. Suddenly, I watched it go down online, and when it got to like $250,000, I discussed this with them, and they were saying that, if they didn't get at least $250,000 for us, they didn't feel that they had done their job.
Right.
And so, I saw it get to that $250,000 part, and I'm thinking, oh, they're going to be happy. And by the time I thought that, it was at 3. And it's like, well, where is this going? And honestly, I really kind of thought the market was going to stand around that $500,000 point for a while, because that was a substantial jump in the value for a Star Wars figure. And then, of course, a couple months later, Golden, they roll out one of the baggy J slots, which is believed to be like very close to what the final version of the figure would have been. And and that thing goes for well over $1 million. So, we're charting some new territory here.
Yeah. So I've got that one. It says the J slot V2 with 2 missiles, and it was a graded AFA 85. So yeah, $1.34 million.
Well, yeah. And consider that that's an open baggie. There's still 2 out there that are sealed.
Wow. Okay. All right. Let's stay on that then for a second. So, Chris Alvarez, did that one belong to Chris? The reason I ask that, Brian, is because I think there was a comment on a Facebook post that said, "Congratulations, Chris Alvarez, Rocket Fett world record."
Yes.
So I didn't know. Sometimes may I ask you a question? Do you assist private buyers and act as like a middleman or someone who can assist with these, because you do very much seem to be.
Yes, I did not have anything involved in Chris's. Yes, I can confirm that was Chris Alvarez's piece, and that had exposure on the King of Collectibles, which I think helped the price there. As far as me, I buy and sell these things. I will broker these things.
Yeah.
In the case of the Heritage situation, I facilitated that as a middleman and helped get that going there. I pretty much wrote the description for Heritage at that point, because there's not a lot of information on these things out there. And people have a tendency just to think L slot, J slot, but they don't understand the nuances of how they break down and the populations on these things.
Yeah.
And I think as we start getting into these higher price points, it's going to become more necessary for these buyers to really understand what they're buying and why they're buying it.
Absolutely. And I think as things get discovered more, because as I was looking through various bits and pieces, I saw a post earlier on, 2016, it looked like there were 9 variations, like 9 within the family, from the wax all the way through the L's and the J's. And now more recently, I've seen a lineup of 13 different variations. Yeah. So have those extra 4 just been sort of realized since 2016?
Well, some of that, it's not so much they've been realized, is that, again, people like to be very quiet about what they have in their collections. The reason, if you're talking about the image I sent you, they had the whole lineup of figures there. 2 of those painted L's, I had to fight for multiple years for permission to show pictures of them, because with the alternate paint schemes, people will say that there's 2 known when there's really was 3, and they're all painted radically unique. But when you just say generically alternate paint scheme 2 or 3, you just assume if you're looking at one, you're looking at the other 2, without straying too much from the initial question there. As far as none of those are new discoveries. They're just discoveries that finally there's permission to bring them forward. And in particular, one of those alternate paint schemes, it's now doesn't really matter, because it's Heritage has that right now. And I believe that'll be up. One of those will be up for auction sometime around in early or late December.
Yeah, I've been looking at that one. That's on the 4th of December. That's coming
4th
out.
of December, okay.
Yeah. Now, is this the one which has got 7 colours rather than 5?
Yes. It's got an extra. So with Kenner, from what I understand, they only like to use 1 or 2 colors for their figures, and they let the plastic do the rest. But Boba Fett was going to be kind of their Cadillac, so they had like 5 colors or so involved, and then for some reason they thought it was going to be a good idea to add an extra color or 2 in there, and that apparently wasn't going to fly. What confuses me a little is why that was done, because if you look at the proto mold and you look at what was produced that didn't fire, you can see the color scheme was pretty much locked in the beginning. Now, the gentleman who painted these for Kenner, if I remember correctly, I've done this for a long period of time, so my memory sometimes gets a little easy. But if I'm remembering the story correctly, the gentleman who painted that particular figure and the alternate paint scheme that I have in my collection, he was trying to sell Kenner on the idea that they could do more on painting their toys. They can offer a greater value to the consumer. So he painted up at least one 12-inch Boba Fett to sell the concept, and that didn't go anywhere. And I'm thinking that these little alternate paint scheme Rocket Fetts, the 3 that exist out there, might have been a holdover from that effort. Otherwise, I'm not really quite sure what was going on there, because again, you look at the proto mold, and then you look at the mailers that actually went out, and even the J slots, you can see the colors are about, the color scheme was about like 90% locked. I think there's just some minor trivialities between the beginning and the end there. Like, for instance, on the proto mold, if you look at the knees are just painted straight across. On the final figures, the J slots and the non-firing Fetts that we got in the mail, they on one of the knees, a little equipment pouch below there is painted. So I mean, there are tiny little things that was added like that, but nothing as drastic as adding the white on the back of some of these alternate paint schemes.
Yeah. I want to talk through the image though, the one which you've got with the 13. So from left to right, and I'm looking at it from left to right, and that's what you believe is almost the chronological journey as well?
Yeah, I try to put them in close to as a chronological journey as possible there. What you're looking at there, with the exception of a couple things that I don't have permission to talk about, unfortunately, is pretty much everything that exists in the hobby. What I didn't send to you, what I should have sent to you, is the one that actually has the population counts below it. But I think that's up on my website if you want to, not my website, but my Facebook page, if you want to check it out there. Awesome. But a lot of those figures, what you see is all that exists. They're one of ones. The exceptions would be the production paint scheme L slots, which are hand painted. There's 2 of those, but even there, the heritage example was painted gray first, then had the highlights applied. Where the one I have in my collection, just the highlights were painted. The gray Fett, which was actually found by Steve Denny, another thing we can thank him for. He found 3 gray L slots, which were finalized to the point they actually have the copyright in the back of the leg. And those were found with 8-sided missiles, which were earlier prototypes because they have the ejector pin marks still on them, which were taken out for the J slots. And he found 3 of them. And to this day, I have not heard of any other gray L slots with the copyright on the back of the leg that have been found. So there's 3 of those. So when you look at that image, the most common ones you see there are the normal L slot, which we think there's like about 70 of them out there, and the J slot, which is around 30.
So in total, I think, initially you were thinking there was going to be around about 100 or so. Yeah. Maybe just a bit over. So, I mean, I know it's difficult to say.
Well, there's a new theory that's coming out here, and this just came up recently on Facebook. We're beginning to wonder if when people talk about 70 L slots existing, if they're actually counting some of the special ones, which we're discussing, like the painted L's, the grays. Because I did the survey. You can ask Chris Georgoulias more about this, because I know he also has kept tried to keep an inventory or a record of everything that's been found going way back to the 90s. But when I did a survey back in 2019, I actually found it really easy to find most of the J slots. But the only way I can get even close to 70 on the L's is I have to add in the specialty pieces.
Right.
So I mentioned this to Tom Derby and another collector out there, and they're starting to think, yeah, maybe there's not as many L's out there that are unpainted as we think there are. You might be talking 60,
right,
in that case, but that's still that's still a lot for a for a prototype though.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem quite high numbers, really.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of an irony. I mean, I mean, for something that wasn't produced, I mean, if you count all variations and you go with that number 100, which everyone likes to throw around without any qualification, that there are more of these prototypes in existence than there are for a lot of the other material out there. I mean, if you look at even some like the first shots for like the little plastic Cape Jawa, I think they say there's like about maybe 12 or or 16 or something. I mean, you're talking rarer pieces when you're looking at some of the other stuff that Kenner produced versus the Rocket Fett. So it's kind of a nice little irony there.
What's the situation with the yellow ones? Now, I think you once owned one of these yellow ones. I'm not sure if you still do now.
Yes, the yellow one. Well, that's what I'm trying to say. That's it. What you're looking there in that image, that yellow one, that's it. No other one exists. My buddy has that one right now, and that's firmly clenched in his hands, and I don't think he's ever going to let that go.
That's the one with a rather interesting white rocket, which
we don't know what's going on with that. We don't know if that. See, initially when that was found, the protomold didn't exist yet. We didn't know a protomold existed.
Right.
So people automatically assumed that little white missile was a prototype missile.
Yeah.
But we now know they already had the four-sided missile locked with the protomold. So then the question is okay, so then how does this fit the picture? And and this, I guess, comes down to where they were doing some of the tooling for this stuff, because the protomold would have been tooled at Kenner in the model shop. If they were working on the production molds, the steel molds overseas, I'm wondering if maybe they hadn't tooled the missile yet, so they may have just created a quick little prototype to test function.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, they were working on the production molds over here, which has been suggested by one of the Kenner employees that was familiar with what was going on, then it makes less sense for them to do that, because they could have just taken a protomold missile and put it in there. So it's possible that little white missile could have been something added to the figure after the fact. We just don't know, but that's how it was found, and that's how it's going to stay together, because that's all part of the provenance of that piece. I will say this, a little aside on this. It just tells you how times change. When that piece was initially found, it was not sonically glued. It came apart. You could take it apart, and no one wanted to buy it. This piece was owned by Darren Muir at the time from the Earth in Cincinnati, and he was the guy that found a lot of these earlier Fetts. And no one would buy it from him. So he glued it together, and as soon as it was glued together, he had no problem selling it. Wow. And now I look back on that and cringe. I wish he had used wax or something, because then we could still pull it apart and see it unassembled. It would be so cool to do that, but I don't think he did it with wax. I think he just glued it. So times change.
Absolutely. So then next to that, you've got one with just yellow trousers, yellow pants, and white arms.
The tricolor, yeah.
Yeah. So again, is that another one of one, is it?
One of a kind. That's it. That's one that still resides in my collection. And yeah, it's a gorgeous piece. And that there's no other ones ever surfaced like that.
Oh, wonderful. The lineup there almost looks like a load of, the Polish bootlegs, when you've got such variety and various different things going on there. It's just with the variations, the shades, the unpainted, the painted, the dark, and from start to finish, it really is a really quite wonderful image.
It's quite an ensemble.
Yeah, it really is. Now, I don't. Do I mean to? Yeah, of course I mean to pry. I'm asking questions. You've got the proto mold, and you've said that one then, which has got the yellow trousers, yellow pants.
Yes.
And so, are you able to share how many of these you own? Or
I have 6 in my collection right now. In 2013, I pretty much picked up most of the Kearns collection. I purchased everything except his normal L slot.
Right.
And of those, I still have about 6 of them in my collection. I've got the other production paint scheme L. I've got one of the alternate paint scheme L's. One of the gray Fetts that I was discussing. Maybe leaving something out there. And of course, I still have my. I wish I'd taken. There was a shot I took of about. It wasn't the shot that I'm showing you here with the black background. I assembled that from different pictures. But when I actually had the Kearns collection, I lined it all up and I photographed it with a few extra pieces in there. And I wish I'd gone for the glory shot because at the time I had those pieces, I still had the 2 in my collection. And then we got an extra J slot in within about a month. So at one point in 2013, I was actually sitting on 11 of these Rocket Fetts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I look back, I'm like, oh, I should have just taken. I get lazy sometimes. And I was like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. And then you start selling things. And then afterwards, you can't put the picture back together. But yeah. So I still have about 6 in my collection.
Right. Now, do these all get graded, authenticated? Does that make sense now to do that?
If you're going to sell one, yes. But for my personal taste, I like them loose because I like to still take them out and fire them. Because I won't do it with my J slot, but the L's, I don't think you can really damage an L unless you dropped it. And that you don't want to do. I've heard, nowadays you're hearing how some people have dropped loose snaggletooths and the plastic has gotten fragile enough that they shatter. So I wouldn't want to drop a Rocket Fett, but firing it, that spring is not strong enough to damage anything. You can sit like the multicolor one we were talking about. I've sat there and just kind of fired it a few times. It's fun to do.
As long as you're not next to your wife again and have it accidentally go off in your hand. Yeah.
Well, yeah. It's not that the spring they used on the later pieces is not the proto mold spring. To get to my wife, I'd actually have to throw the missile at her, and she'd probably throw it back. It wouldn't be a good thing. So,
on your RockfellEnterprises.com, you've currently got one. It appears that it might be for sale, but I think it's more you're encouraging people to contact you because you've got some wonderful things.
We have one available. I had a very interesting phone call with a gentleman. I think now is about 2 years ago, and you get this all the time when you're dealing with these Rocket Fetts. People will call you. They tell you they had one as a kid, and you have to break the bad news to them. And in fact, a week earlier, Sansweet sent a guy over to me because he thought he had a painted L slot, and clearly it was a doctored piece.
Mm-hmm. No.
So I was getting ready to go to dinner with the wife, and a guy calls on the phone, really nice gentleman, and he's asking me what I would charge to appraise his collection. He had some figures that he had as a child. He played with them, and then very sheepishly he kind of sneaks in. He had a Rocket Fett. So at this point here, I'm thinking, oh, here we go again. So the first question I ask him is, well, where did you grow up? And he says, I grew up in San Francisco. And then my family sometimes spent time in Oklahoma. Okay, well, that's the wrong placement for one of these things.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, did you have any friends, relatives work at Kenner? Nope. So I'm thinking, well, this can't be real. But, I'm like, okay, be kind. I said, look, I'm going to dinner. Send me some photos. But I don't just want a photo of the back. I want to give me a shot of the shoulder. And there's certain things I wanted to see.
Mm-hmm. So
I come back from dinner. I'm already composing in my mind hey, I'm sorry, buddy, but I open up the files, and you got to remember this guy is telling me he played with these things as a kid. So I'm thinking, no, it can't be. And I open up the file, and just the color yellow I see on the figure, I'm like, oh God, this is real. And then I look at the slot, and I was, oh, geez, okay, something's wrong here because this is a real piece. Because they use a specific orange on the J slots, and it's got a lot of yellow to it. Where when they transition to the non-firing mailers, it's definitely a very orange looking color.
Right.
So I call him back up and trying to find out more information. And then he sends me over a picture of his tray of his other figures. And aside from the Yoda in there, everything else is Empire Strikes Back and nothing of note. A couple Jedi figures. But I'm looking at both the Boba Fett's in the tray, and they both have the same color, yellow. And I'm like, you have two of these things? He's like, well, gosh, yeah. And I'm like, oh, my God. So, so as it turned out, his father did some investment banking for oil or whatever, and he had contacts with people over there in Hong Kong. And these were actually given to him by someone who had contacts to the toy trade over there as a gag gift. And basically like, here, they're not making them anymore, so they're worthless, but you can have them.
Wow. Wow.
And the kid, he played with them and he didn't manage to break either one.
Blimey.
So that particular piece we have on the site there, it's available for conversation, and it was really nice about it. It doesn't have the markings on the feet, which is the other reason I began to believe the guy's story, because most of these, when they come from the Kenner employees, the feet are marked because the J slots were engineering pilots that came in for testing.
Right.
And they had to know what group they were in, whether they were in a control group, one that was being baked, one that was being frozen, or whatever they did to these things. And so they would mark the feet. Well, that particular figure is unmarked. It's clean. And again, this is where you can get into some of these subgroups. Yes, there's 30 J slots out there, but most of them will have marked feet. Trying to find one with clean feet is almost impossible. The baggied ones, of course, have clean feet, but that's pretty obvious. They were in the bags. I know of a couple others that have some clean feet, but the figures are damaged. So, getting a J slot that's clean is a very, very difficult thing to do. But yeah, that's not just up there just to have it up there. It's a good calling card as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that's available to see on rockfallenterprises.com. Wonderful. The one which is for sale coming up at Heritage Auction is an AFA 80 L slot hand painted alternative paint scheme. So this is the one which has got the two additional colours of white little rocket boosters at the bottom, and then a small little black band across the top of the helmet. So yeah, to see 7 colours on that's pretty wonderful.
Yeah, that is a gorgeous piece, and the condition's nice. The one that Heritage sold that was the production paint scheme was only an AFA 60, and this one's 80. So I'm very curious what this one's going to go for. But again, this is one of those one-of-a-kind pieces. So if a collector out there was going to want to throw down for something, this is the one you fight for, because once if it goes into a black hole collection, you're not going to have another bite at the apple.
Yeah, it looks great.
I'm going to be following that auction with great interest, and I know Golden's working on a few things, so it's going to be interesting to see how they follow up their, the one that went for 1.3 mil. I think they just had a normal L go for like 174, but that's about what a normal L slot should go for. I mean, again, I think Hakes has got one coming up pretty soon. That's an 85. So, if you on a normal L, if you miss one today, there'll be another one out there tomorrow. But when you're talking like this painted one, I mean, that's a one of one. I mean, you can't get better from that. You start looking at that in terms of what sport cards go for, or where comics go for. I mean, the thing with the Star Wars market is right now we're still a small market, but if there's really no room for an increase in demand. And if there is, I mean, we could really see some of these rare pieces just really skyrocket in value. Because where do you go to get another one?
Well, the thing is, pricing wise, I mean, it's all fairly relative. You look back in the 90s, and the people who would have been really keen on this probably didn't have a great deal of disposable income, would have been very young adults and maybe starting to have children or, what have you, and not as much disposable. Whereas now, we're all getting older. Some people are starting to pull their pension. Some people becoming, very successful. And therefore, they want the nostalgia. They want everything else. They might be in a slightly better position to be able to do it. And who knows what these things are going to reach.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, back in the mid '90s, yeah, a lot of, I mean, people were going to college and stuff, and I mean, they had their assets were at work in other places, and yeah, now some people can kick back and they have the resources, so if they want it, they can go for it. So I'm really curious to see where we're going to be out in a couple of years here. If these prices, especially on the rare pieces that they do seem to maintain, we keep hitting these mid six figure, seven figure numbers, and how high do they go? I mean, again, comparing this to, some sport cards, I mean, they're talking 30, 40 million for some sport cards. I don't think we're going to see a Rocket Fitt get to those levels, but it makes you wonder how much upside room you still have in some of these things.
Yeah.
Like the proto mold. I mean, I don't plan on selling that because it's the proto, but it's the photo sample. But I mean, it makes you wonder what would happen. The dealer in me in the back of my mind is like, yeah, but what would happen if that one came up? Because that is, I mean, that it's got the best provenance you can have. You turn over a 21 back card figure and you point to the figure there and say, see, there it is.
It's like the props, isn't it, which get screen matched. What you've been able to do is look at that proto mold and look at the sort of intricate the painting on it and just completely match that, and it, as you say, the provenance.
Oh yeah, yeah. And and for several years I didn't believe it was the piece. I mean, I bought it mainly because it was a proto mold and I didn't have one. I wanted the proto mold, an L slot, and a J slot. That was my focus. But I was at a convention, I think it was one of the ICC conventions, and I'm sitting across from one of the Chris's, and we're getting into a conversation, and just very casually he slips in. He says, "You do realize that's the photo sample, right?" I'm like, "No, it can't be." And he says, "Oh, we think it is." Like, "No." And he's like, "Yeah, all right, well, whatever you say." And I was telling that to a friend of mine, and my friend was of the same opinion. He says, "Yes, I think that's that's the piece they used." And so finally, after he nagged me for 2 years, I sat down, pulled up a picture of my piece, pulled up a picture a friend of mine had sent me of the photo art. So not even the actual transparency, but this was something that was already airbrushed. And I'm like, all right, fine. Well, this has a nick on the chest here. My piece is the same. I would have to, oh, okay, there's a nick on the chest there. Well, mine's got 2 little nicks below that. This one would have to have, oh, look at that. There are 2 nicks below that too. Well, there's a smear of paint. Oh, there's a smear of paint there. So this went on for a while. And then I finally reached out to Kim Simmons. I said, look, can you send me over some close-ups of some areas of this so I could use it to match? And so he sent me over some close-ups of the figure that from the original transparencies. And the one that really did it for me was one of the knees, because in the image that Kenner used, you can see there's right on the knee where it's painted orange, right on the seam, there's a little circular dollop of paint, and there's 2 little peaks right below it. And you look on mine, and there's that little dollop of paint, and there's 2 little peaks right below it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I talked to Tom, I talked to Ben Sheehan. They're convinced it's the photo sample. But what really did it was talking to one of the other collectors that collects these photo samples. And he's like, I'm in your boat there. He says, I want to say it is. He says, but I want to be careful. He says, check it to see if there's any wax or anything on there. Because if it was a photo sample, it should have wax. And yeah, sure enough, under magnification, I found wax in the hand where the blaster would have been held. And in the spring, because remember I told you, it doesn't latch properly. Yeah. So my question was, if this was the photo sample, how would they have got the missile not to go, launching by itself? Yeah. Well, there's residue of wax in the spring coils.
Well, there's some knowledge for you. Wow.
Yeah. But with all of that, I mean, if that went up for auction, I mean, what the hell would that bring? It makes you wonder.
Well, that's a decision for you to have, and only you to have one day.
Yeah, well, and I think that's going to be a curiosity that's not going to be satiated for many, 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 many years. But the dealer in me, it's like there is that curiosity. What would something with that type of provenance, bring?
Have you had many people ask you?
To buy that particular piece? No, because I think it's pretty much understood. It is not for sale.
Okay.
It's not for sale. Let's see. It's.
Now, it almost
I
seems...
gotta find a way to display it though, because it doesn't have the peg holes on the bottom of the feet, and it is a little loose in the joint, so it wants to flop over, and I don't want it breaking. So I've got to eventually, at some point, have a little something made for it to hold it up, or maybe that's one I do send in to have it graded. But what I don't like about the graded figures is they always have the missile off to the side.
Right.
You don't get to see the piece in its full glory. If they could find a way to grade that and have the missile in the backpack, that might be something. That might be the way to do it for that one there. But that's an idea for another day.
Yeah, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. I felt the same about DT sabers. In production figures, I didn't like seeing them not in the arm. I just want to briefly go to the wax mold, if I may. The original one, the first one over on the left, the one without the rocket. It almost seems that you kind of feel sorry for it. Now, how many of those?
You feel sorry for it.
Yeah, because he's just there. Everyone else has got a rocket or two in some areas, and he's just there on its own. So,
well, like I say, if you look at it, it's a bad omen, isn't it?
Yeah. Is there much sort of
mechanism? Not even a groove for it.
No. Is there much desire for this? I mean, is this a popular one which has passed from person to person? How much do you know about?
Well, I really was not involved in that at all. I think Jordan Hembrough from Hollywood Heroes discovered that, and it's traded hands, I think, only a couple times. And from what I understand, it's pretty much in a permanent home right now.
Right.
That's about. And they had a nice little display. Tom Derby had a nice little display made for it. It looks gorgeous. But other than that, I don't really know what I can say about it because, I don't know a lot about I have an idea what it went for, but I'm going to keep that price private. And I wasn't involved in the original discovery. So I can just tell you, I'm just very happy that it still exists out there. And I wish I had the call, because that's mostly something I would have picked up for the collection and also held on to dearly.
Yeah.
It would have been cool to have that next to the proto mold.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the L's and the J's. Now, my eyes are now taken to the other end of your photograph of the lineup. Now, next to the J with the two rockets.
Well, the reason I put two rockets there is because we now know, for at least from the bagged figures, that they would have come with two rockets. So I kind of put it there just for reference sake.
Yeah, and again, that's the one which recently sold. But the one next to it,
it was a J slot type that sold. I think the one in the image there is a short stem, so it probably would be a version 1. Or categorized just as a J slot. The one that sold was a version 2. So that came out of what they believe are the final polished mold. So it's very sharp. I've seen a couple of the baggy ones in person, and the figures look very sharp. They almost look like, if you're familiar with coins, they look like proofs. They're really sharp in detail.
Oh, wow. I just wanted to ask you that I'm just slightly confused, which is the story of my life often. The one at the end next to the J with the two rockets.
The peach and black one, the flesh tone with the black back.
Yeah.
Well, that one, there's an interesting story with that one, because basically with the Boba Fett, all of the first shots and prototypes are rocket firing. That particular peach colored Fett with the black torso was actually created well after they had already finalized the non-firing version. The letter of authenticity that came with that describes it as both a first shot and an engineering pilot. The letter goes on to describe that Kenner was bringing a third manufacturer online in the 80s, and what they did, they wanted to test the Kenner molds at that factory to make sure everything worked. And so that Boba Fett was created in the 80s as a consequence of vetting another manufacturer.
Oh, right.
And there's only 2 of those known. Up until, I think last year, there was only 1 known, and another one just recently surfaced. a gentleman had his wife had family overseas in Hong Kong, and when they went back there to visit, she showed him her bucket of Star Wars figures, and I guess they lived very close to the actual manufacturer, and so she actually had some first shots and prototypes in there, and the second non-firing Peach Fett was actually in that bucket. So there's now two of those, and they're very rare.
Yeah, but a first shot engineering pilot, I've never heard the two together.
I haven't heard of that either. It's usually kind of either or.
Yeah.
But that's how he describes it in the letter. So, and he was the guy in charge of vetting that vetting the manufacturers. So who am I to question him? But yeah, usually it's either a first shot or an engineering pilot. But the one, at least the example that I owned and that I sold to my friend is that. Now we did reach out to that particular individual that was responsible for saving that one, and we were showing him pictures of the new one that was discovered. And basically, he would not vouch for it being the exact same thing, although it probably is. But I think he was just kind of, because he wasn't involved in the discovery, he did not personally save it himself. He didn't want to basically say one thing or the other about the new discovery. But I can't imagine it would be anything different. I mean, it's definitely nothing else. It's a first shot.
Yeah. Now, in the simplest...
But normally you don't see first shots with copyright in the back of the leg.
No. So in the simplest form, was I right in thinking that people are referring to the L slots as first shots and the J slots as engineering pilots?
Yeah, L slots are first shots, J slots are engineering pilots. And had they gone forward with the project, I guess the next step would have been a production pilot run and then full production. But we all know what happened, so...
Sure. Yeah, it's just a nice way to sort of differentiate between the two as well, and for people to help understand.
Yeah, and unfortunately, people just kind of lump it all together. But yeah, they are definitely distinctively different things. Yeah.
Brilliant. No, that's really great to know. Now, Brian, just with regards to this, because it's fascinating. I know that you would have done a load of work in the past. There'll be some stuff online. You curated various different bits and pieces. Where is the best information where you would like to sort of direct people for any further information or videos which may have been made? What would you like to recommend?
Well, there are two videos that I did with Chris Georgoulias. The original one was for the ICCC convention back in, I think, 2019, and that's up online on YouTube. And then there's the history of Kenner's Rocket Firing Boba Fett, which Chris and I did with Jim Swearingen for Star Wars Celebration a couple years ago, and that's more updated, and that's also up on YouTube. And those are really the best places to go if you want to sit down. They're about 40. It's a long video. They're about 45 minutes to an hour long, but we cover everything that we've gone over here in a very strict chronological order. Chris is really good at describing the origins of the Boba Fett, how it came to be, how Kenner learned about it. I go into details about all the different variations. And then, we have some stories from Jim Swearingen about his famous kit bashed Fett, which is missing. And it covers a lot. It's very thorough. And if people have questions about these things, they're thinking they want to start investing in these things, it really would behoove them to go and take a look at that there, so you understand what you're buying, basically.
Brilliant. Sounds like there's so much information. I'm sure one day there'll be a book in the pipeline, because there is
somebody needs to do it. Someone needs to do it. Because there's a lot of nuances, and my thing is that I think as the prices get higher and higher, people are going to need to start dialing in to why.
Yeah,
it's like coin collecting. You have one penny that's from Philadelphia. It might be worth $20,000, but you put an estimate mark on there. Well, now it's a $200,000 penny. Put a D on there. Now it's a $2 million penny because it's the only one known. And I think with some of these rocket Fetts, especially like when you get into the J slots, you could eventually have that type of a situation because, like like for instance, if you want to find a short stem J, which would probably be a version 1 or categorized just as a J slot, because some don't really fit a specific category. There's only 2 that I know of that don't have marked feet. So I would assume that those would go for a premium over the ones that do have marked feet. And so those are little nuances that I think in time might actually add value to some of these things. But right now, people are just kind of looking at a J slot as just a J slot.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's like focus collectors for carded figures. To a lot of people, it would just be just a particular character, but focus collectors will understand, exactly what they've got and what they're looking at.
Oh yeah, they go for all the different mold variations and stuff. Yeah. And like I say, you do have it with these, even with the L slots. So let's just take the normal unpainted blue-gray L slots. There's at least 3 different back variations on that, and some are rarer than others, and probably because they were earlier examples. So, at some point, maybe that, if you have one that has a real sharp slant to it and is not quite as finished, maybe there's a extra value there. Maybe there isn't, but time will tell.
Mm-hmm. If you had to choose one, which one would it be and why?
I think for me, it would have to, it would be a toss-up between the proto-mold and my production painted L. It would be a toss-up between the 2. I think I'd have to go with the proto-mold simply because of the history to it.
Yeah.
But that's a hard question because each one offers a little something different. And maybe the reason I might go with the production painted L slot is I can still fire the missile on that one there. You have to be careful so you don't damage the paint, but you can fire the missile. Mm-hmm. The proto-mold, it's got the history, but you can't fire it. It's something that is just more to sit on the shelf and look at, where you can still have an interaction with the painted L. So maybe it would be the painted L. Maybe, I don't know. It's a very hard question.
Okay. Oh, I've got one other. I'm sure I read somewhere where you were talking about one of the figures and then said, "Yeah, I had it in my hand before the unfortunate face issue." Was there something when one figure was getting cleaned up, something happened to one?
Got cleaned up.
Oh.
Yeah, that's if that is the other alternate paint scheme L, the one that's in my collection. When that was initially discovered, it was in really nice condition, very similar to the one that's being offered by Heritage. But people didn't understand that the paint that Kenner used on these still is a bit tacky even to this day. It's a heavy rubbery type of paint.
All right.
And when it was shipped off to Tom Derby to be authenticated, it was just wrapped up in tissue paper. And when it was unwrapped, some of the paint unfortunately came off. And then it was left. I was talking to Tom about this last year, and he was saying it left little strands of tissue paper stuck to the paint. So Tom went through and cleaned it up, and he did a beautiful job. But unfortunately, some of the paint on the helmet kind of rubbed off. So it was a learning curve.
Yeah.
That, everyone always assumes you want to handle these things with cotton gloves, but actually, when it comes to a painted L slot, you do not want to use cotton gloves. You just want to wash your hands and handle it carefully, because if you pick one of these things up with a cotton glove, you are going to also leave little strands on there. So that was kind of sad. Things happen, unfortunately.
Yep.
I just heard of something. It's another toy entirely, but I just heard about it was discovered in a really nice condition. They figured it would have been an AFA 80, and unfortunately it wasn't shipped right, and it graded a lot lower. But that's not Rocket Fight related, but accidents do happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you have a painted L, folks, just handle it with your hands and be careful with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's just try to look after these things. And that links me just to say, it would be, great if someone like CAS or whoever could figure out how to preserve and look after your proto mold with the rocket in it, but so you can still access it whenever you want, just to feel it hold it, smell it, and all that
Well,
sort of stuff.
that would be nice too. But like I said, that's a whole other thing because that's not something I'm going to want to send off in the mail.
No.
It's something I would want to have to fly out there, and I mean that's going to take some time. So right now it just right now it rests in the safety deposit box where it's safe.
Good stuff.
Yes.
Brian, thank you so much for coming on and educating me somewhat on the Rocket Firing Boba Fetts and the variations which there are and how you've come to have these in your hands and go through your hands in your involvement in it from a collecting point of view. It's been fascinating to listen to you. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. I was happy to do it.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too. You
Cheers,
too.
Brian.
Talk to you later.
Thanks very much indeed. Bye.
Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
So that was brilliant, Jez. I'm so glad that you had that in your back pocket, because it would have been such a shame not to share all that information. It's a fantastic interview. I know when I listened to it, I immediately texted you and said, "This is gold," and it's fantastic.
You have your moments. Not many of them, but you do have them.
Massive thanks to Brian for doing that for us. It's a great interview.
Yeah, he's so can do, really, really helpful, which now points me to something else which I really want to encourage people to do. That, you know, for further information on this, there are a couple of really great YouTube videos which he mentioned in the interview. So you've got the ICC Con Rocket Firing Fett on YouTube. It was launched in May 2021. So that's Chris Georgoulias, Brian Rachfal, and Darren Johnson, who has got a brilliant story of how he came across a very special Rocket Firing Fett. And the other video which they talk about is the history of Kenner's Rocket Firing Fett, the Celebration Collecting track, which was put on YouTube 10th of June 2022. And again, Chris Georgoulias, Brian Rachfal, and Jim Swearingen from Kenner. So yeah, 2 great videos for people to watch and check out. So yeah, there we go.
Yeah. I mean, regards Brian's video, how many people do you know that have owned at one time Rocket Firing Fetts, and then not even photograph them all together? That'd be like the first thing I did. It'd be like group shot, but it's like
no.
Yeah, he's so blasé about it, but yeah, he's obviously got expert knowledge. It's excellent to have him share all of that.
But it was just, you know, the you're absolutely right, but just the kind-hearted way of just sharing that information and you know, doing the panels, but just you know, having a lovely chat with me online, and yeah, good fun.
So obviously some of the auctions that Brian covered there, we are going to cover in the next episode. So we haven't finished with Rocket Firing Fetts yet, and we'll circle back round and talk about some of the more recent auctions and what's been happening there.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, really, really good. So yeah, let's talk about the next couple of shows then. So what do you have planned, Dan, for episode 2 and 3 of this Fett trilogy?
Yeah, so episode 2 will be back to business as usual. We will be talking the Boba Fett figure. We'll start off talking about all of our, you know, what we all think of it, which I think I've got a feeling, Jez, it's going to be a fairly positive conversation. I might be wrong, but I think we'll talk about Fett tax. That's always a hot topic, and we will take a look at the card back and variations and all of that good stuff. But we will only be covering the figure in that episode because it's such a big subject. And then in the 3rd episode, we will move on to talk about the 12-inch Fett. We're going to talk about the Slave One ship. We're going to look at the what's it called, the one-man sail skiff, because Boba Fett's on the boxer there and everything else that he appears on. And then we are going to do a proper Craig's Corner. So after kind of going through the dregs of the bounty hunters we've been through so far, we're going to kind of sum up everything that Boba Fett's been on and each pick out a few key choice items to discuss and have a proper Craig's Corner and look at the Beyond the Toys. And that is going to be sooner than you think. So hopefully by the time this episode drops, we'll have already recorded the next one and it will be on its way. So you won't have to wait a million years for that. Certainly not all month.
Excellent.
I like the sound of that.
Well, that is it for this show. But if you want more Generation Skywalker between shows, we have a back catalogue now of over 150 episodes, including more vintage collecting with the previous 27 episodes of those old fossils, plus modern collecting with the modern way, committees, interviews, movie commentaries, and our Look At series where we discuss the Disney Plus shows and much more. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, YouTube and TikTok, as well as Threads for the latest Generation Skywalker show announcements and more. Just search Generation Skywalker to find and follow us. And if you want to interact with a host of Generation Skywalker and other listeners, why not join the We Are Generation Skywalker Facebook page? If you enjoyed this show or any of our shows, why not thank us with a 5-star review on your podcast listening platform of choice? It really does support the show and help others to find us.
No disintegrations.
As you wish.
So once again, a massive thank you to Brian Rachfal and to Chris Georgoulias from the Star Wars Collectors Archive for their time and contribution. But until next time, it is good night from Jez.
See you next time.
And it is good night from me. We are Generation Skywalker. All eras, all passions, all Star Wars.